You don't wanna see me in the street. Get down. Packing word instead of packing heat. I'm a soldier. Hey. Soldier. Hey. Soldier.
Welcome to the chopping block. I'm the Chief. This is my co-partner in crime,
Dr. Richie.
Today, Dr. Richie, we're going to talk about drugs.
Heavy stuff.
Hey, you know, one of the things I'd like to start off with this episode, and hey, thanks for tuning in, and we're going to be doing a lot more episodes, so stay in tune every week. Be ready for new stuff coming out. But today we want to address this subject. It's going to take a little time. We're going to talk about drugs. We're going to talk about what you know about drugs personally and what you've learned about drugs, and then I'll talk.
Me?
Yeah, you.
Oh, man. All right.
And then I'm going to go into my story a little bit about drugs and what I know about drugs. And then we're going to talk about the drug situation. It's on TV, it's on the news, it's in the White House, it's all over the place. It's rampant, it's epidemic. I mean, it's just a disease affecting people everywhere, every class, status of people. And then we're going to talk about some solutions, some places people can get help and what we've learned about it and our ideas on, ending this drug war, and stopping this. So, Dr. Richie, if it's cool, why don't you start us off today? And once again, welcome to the chopping block.
Welcome.
The place you can get some, unedited, uncut info. It's not been stepped on. I mean, this is stuff fresh.
Uncut,
We deal with people every day. We know about drugs. You might wonder what this spoon is here. And we'll talk about that later. This spoon is significant, especially you drug addicts out there, especially you dealing with drug addicts, especially you people that want to know about drug addicts and what they're all about. This spoon will come in handy to talk about.
Very big Fruit Loops must have been eaten by this, or so, I don't know.
Yeah, the Jolly Green Giant. And I don't mean Greenpeace. Anyway, Dr. Richie, tell me your story a little bit about, because it's so often when I hear people talk on TV or movies or documentaries, whatever, and they're experts because we consider ourselves experts because we've been doing this 40 years, 30 years, 70 years together. You can get all of our wisdom and you can learn something today.
Yeah.
But I like to hear from people that have been there, done that, know what they're talking about. Not just a nice, Dr. Drew's cool. People like that are good. A lot of experts are good. Dr. Phil, this is a real Dr. Phil.
Yes.
But, when we come about somebody that's really been there and understands all the trouble, all the trials, all the testings, all the lives, the families that have been destroyed because of just this one word, drugs. Tell me your story a little bit about drugs.
Man, this is heavy, bro, and this could be, a million episodes. But the thing is, just when you talk about the pain, I know you and I have worked with families where the last family session before someone leaves treatment, we got the whole family there and hugging the mom, and then 3 weeks later, we're hugging the mom at her son or daughter's funeral, and they're sobbing. So I like to joke around a lot because life can be so intense. It's kind of the way to soften it. But I also have a very serious side, and I've lost some of my best friends, as I talked about last week in our episode, some of my best friends to heroin overdoses. And we've lost people that we knew and loved that we've worked with. And it's gut-wrenching, man. It's sad. But my personal story, I think that our stories, when it involves drugs, we have to talk about the point in history when we were born, because to me it's relevant. I was born in 65, so I started smoking weed at age 11. Prior to that, it was cigarettes a little bit. That my mom was a chain smoker, still is, wakes up at 3 a.m. and have one. And I would hate the cigarette smoke. And back then, it wasn't like now where, DCFS will be called if you smoke in the car. I mean, the windows are up in the station wagon with the fake wood panels. And I'm like, Mom, can you crack the windows? Shut up. It's like, I was the problem back then. And I'm like, I hate it. But then I still started smoking anyway. Was it the thing to look cool? And then we had horses and chickens, stuff like that. So I went in the barn and smoked one and got sick to my stomach. And then ended up years later becoming addicted. So that was one of my first drugs. When I was younger than that, my grandfather's, he was a Jewish grandfather, totally cool dude. I ended up finding out he had a little problem with alcohol, a little problem with gambling. So my grandma, this is my father's parents, my grandma ran the show. But he was super cool, and he just gave her the feria from whatever work he did. And because he couldn't just have money, he'd be messing it off on alcohol. So, and then on my mom's side of the family, where she shielded us a lot from that side of the family. And sometimes you wonder, well, how did I become an addict? My parents aren't really whatever. But then it's like, okay, well, my uncles that I don't really know are all ex-dope fiends or dope fiends and, convicts and stuff like that. So I think that the family thing is real. My mom has that type of addictive thing, but she avoided the illicit drugs and the unpopular, but the socially acceptable things like alcohol. Like I remember one morning she comes out and I'm like, are you drinking first thing in the morning? Not trying to be judgmental. It probably came off that way. And she's like, it's a mimosa. Oh, okay, shit. All right. But there's still alcohol in it.
Right.
And that's cool. But we justify things. You know, we always minimization, denial, blame, justification.
So you were exposed to it in your family as part of the culture of the family.
A little bit, you know, and my father was a very open dude. And he told me about his life. Like we've always been very close. So he had told me that he wanted to see what it was like to smoke cigarettes for 6 months and drink alcohol when he went into the Army, and to see if you could really get addicted or not. Like my dad groomed me, I think, to be a mental health professional, a psychologist without knowing it, just the way our relationship was. He's very psychologically minded. So he was surprised after 6 months of smoking in the Army how hard it was to quit. But he's such a determined dude. And I don't think that side of the family has much of an addictive type personality or the thread going through them. I always tell people, man, if we knew the thousands of generations before us what their problematic behaviors were, we wouldn't get blindsided like we do. But for me personally, so I think like my uncle of my mom's youngest brother might have blown pot smoke in my face when I was a little kid because he lived with us for a little while. So there's those like kind of like little blurry memories, and who knows if it's true or not kind of type thing because it's so long ago. But I first started smoking weed in 1976. I was 11 years old, and I didn't get high till the fifth time that I smoked weed, because back then I was smoking bunk weed. We were doing out of bong. I mean, the typical thing, like the first time I took a bong, he's like, okay, put your mouth on it. And then he goes, blow. And I blew the water out, you know? So like the way we all make those mistakes, and we're trying to be cool then, you know, it's like the motorcycle guy, if he dumps his bike, oh man, but you know, everybody's done it. So it was like about being cool and stuff like that. I didn't get high, and I was like, okay, I smoked it. And I'm like, I'm not feeling anything. And they're like, did you feel it? And those other dudes are like, we're stoned. And I'm like, you know, is this it? But there's nothing. And then, but the fifth time that I tried it, it was like some Indo or chronic or whatever. It was in my neighborhood. I grew up in the valley, and it was in this dude's treehouse. And I did a huge bong load or whatever, and that hit me. And it was like later what an acid trip would be almost.
So
like
smoking marijuana was your entry.
That was my gateway,
yeah.
bro. That was my gateway. And that's why I tell my kids, you know, I'm not against marijuana, and I know it has healthy properties, but I encourage them, hey, don't try marijuana, don't try cigarettes, don't try alcohol, because it's not going to really make your life that much better, but it has the potential to make it worse and to lead it into that. So marijuana was my gateway. I didn't really like alcohol much. I think there's a biological component to it, but I've abused alcohol in my life, like later. But the thing with alcohol, it made my body kind of feel uncomfortable, and I liked to have my body feel good and just my head to be high. So I was a weed smoker, and then you know, they'd come to our sixth grade, you know, middle school class, talk about how like drugs are dangerous and they'll kill you and all that. And then I'm smoking weed and it's not killing me. So I'm like, oh, they're full of shit. Like it happens a lot. And so that led then to like trying beer, alcohol, and then shrooms and cocaine and, you know, LSD and pills, a million other things, ether. I mean, I've done every drug that I can think of except DMT and bath salts, you know, and I'm cool on bath salts, you know what I'm saying, just from what I've heard. And that's the thing is, like, even when I was done with drugs and I had been addicted to a bunch of them, something would come out and I'd want to try it, like that salvia shit. And stupid ass me, you know how we are, we want more. I'm like, okay, let me get the most potent and let me do a few hits. And thank God it's like 5 minutes or 3 minutes or whatever, because that was like hell. It was the worst experience I ever had.
What percentage of the young people that you hung out with were doing this with you? Would you say?
A large percentage, like 100 to 90 to 100, because that was our crew. That was what we did for some reason. Now, like you said, it's not a socioeconomic thing because we weren't in the ghetto. We were kind of like rich kids. I grew up in Hidden Hills, Calabasas, went to Calabasas High School. We had access to funds. We had very little responsibility, a lot of free time, very little supervision. And it was before the cocaine, even the powder cocaine problem. So drugs didn't have the negative connotation that they do today. And also, like, there was a smoking section, cigarette smoking in our school. So it was a different mindset, you know, in the 70s. You know, you were around, you know, you got saved in the joint in the late 70s. And I remember your things, and we'll talk about it in one of the next episodes. But that was my gateway, and I started doing other things. And it was what defined me. You know, I was a drug user, because when you're young, there's like the cliques, there's the stoners, the surfers, the jocks, or whatever. And so I was a stoner. And it was weird because people were labeling me that even before I was. So it was kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy, because I had long hair, I looked like a little surfer or whatever. And it's weird how that stuff follows you, because when I was in a fraternity, and I'll go back and forth because of the ADHD type thing, chopping block. But when I was in a fraternity at USC, just because I wanted to check it out, my dad had been in a frat, and they give, just like in a motorcycle club where everybody has a moniker, and the big brothers give their little brothers monikers, and mine was Overdose,
Overdose. Wow.
And so it was like something that I portrayed, but then it's like, hey, are you going to live up to that type thing? So just to backtrack a little bit, weed was my gateway, and then started trying everything else. I turned my sister onto it like 6 months later. She's 3.5 years older than me. And what happened was, I guess she ended up telling my dad, and then he had a talk with me. My dad's the coolest dude in the world, but it's funny the way he talks about stuff. And his whole thing was like, no matter what, I just want you to always be honest and communicate, stay connected. This was before cell phones, pagers, so it was house phones and pay phones. So I would always stay in touch with him and let him know where I was, and I would be honest to him. And I had to tell him at like 17 that I had shot heroin. That sucked because he asked me, but he was just such a cool, supportive father. And so, but at this point, when I was like 11 and a half or something like that, he's like, so I heard you become a pothead or something, his terminology.
Wow, okay.
And so I had such a good relationship with him, and there wasn't fear. It was, I didn't want to disappoint him, because he was such a good dad. So I'm like, yeah, I've been smoking it. And he's like, well, I think you're a little young to be making that decision to be smoking marijuana. And I'm like, all right, well, how old do you think would be old enough to where I could be mature enough to make that decision? And, being from a Jewish culture, he was probably just trying to buy some time. He's like, well, at least 13, so I quit for, probably like 6 months and hit 12. And I'm like, fuck it, I'm close enough. You know how like the thing of you, like you're going to get burned. Well, how bad I'm going to get burned? Well,
Right.
13, well, 12's closer to 13 than 11. So then I was just back on it again. And it's just such a trippy thing with relationships too. The times my sister and I have been close in our lives, and we've lived at a lot of the same communities just on a serendipity trip, it's because we would smoke weed together. She'd call me up, hey, Richie, you want to get stoned? I'd be like, yeah, sure. She's like, you got any? I'm like, yes, because I always did. And so I dealt in high school, but I didn't have it at school, and they'd hit my locker, or like kids would be passing notes, like chicks would be writing notes to each other, and then the teacher, how they take the note and they read it out loud. And where can we, do you want to get stoned? Yeah, where can we get some weed? Oh, Richie Cole. And then they call me into the office, and I'm like, maybe just because they know I smoke weed, but I'm not selling it, and then they'd hit the locker, but there was nothing in there. Or then...
So you got the name Overdose.
Yeah.
Now you got your family smoking weed. Your dad knows you're up to something like that, but he's trying to be cool with you.
Yes.
And you're trying to be smart. You're trying to fit in with everybody.
Yeah.
And it just became part of the little
it's
cycle.
who I was, bro. Just like in the motorcycle world, whatever. It was my identity. And so it progressed, and I thought I'd smoke weed every day for the rest of my life. And I did it for 20 years, plus a lot of other things. And now that it's legal, I don't have a desire to, I could or whatever. But so it's weird how we change, things change, and even in our desires. Like you told me that scripture, the desires of the heart, so, but it's a trip because I tried all these things. And I remember when I was young and I went to camp, and I heard about these older counselors took LSD, they took acid, and one of the chicks freaked out. And I'm like, I didn't even know, I thought acid was something totally different than later what it turned out. And I'm like, man, that's scary. I wouldn't do that. But then just 3 years later, I'm taking acid.
A whole lot of times we say, I'd never do that. I'd never do this. The next thing you know, we're exposed to it. It's part of it and stuff like that.
And
so then you
nothing.
started with hallucinogenics in it.
Yeah, that was the whole thing, shrooms and LSD, and I went through that. And, it's a young person's trip, and I was fortunate that I really didn't have bad trips because I had issues just like we all do, but I was, I guess, somewhat psychologically stable because I didn't have real bad trips. But with every drug that I used, towards the end of it, once it started to get bad, it would turn negative on me, whether it's ecstasy or LSD. And so when it started to turn negative, that's usually when I'd push off it, or I'd get off of something with something else. So I was probably what you consider a functional addict for a lot of years, and all my friends would be doing worse. So that's how I justify, well, he's going to meetings, so I must not be that bad, or he's going to rehab, so I must be that bad, or he's going to jail, or he's dying. And it's like, shit. You know what I'm saying? It just kept getting worse. And I would minimize mine as compared to, like you said, who was I hanging around? They were people who did drugs, because that's what we did. That's what we justified. That's who we connected with. That was the glue of our relationship.
You're still going to school all this time, though.
This was in middle school. You know what I'm saying?
Okay.
This was in middle school and high school. And so then and I was dealing in high school. And then when I went to college, I dealt for a little while too. And in fact, for the first 3 years of college, even though I went to 3 different colleges, there was buddies of mine that went to those colleges, and I was dealing a little bit cocaine, and it was really weird the way stuff happens. At USC, they had this magazine, which is something about, like the Row magazine or whatever, because there's like the frat row. and they had all the new students a picture of them with a little goof. I said like my name was Overdose, so it had a goof like geek or whatever or horror. Like it wasn't that hardcore, but and so the thing is, somebody came up to me on campus. I hadn't seen the paper yet, and they're like, "Hey man, you got any coke?" I'm like. And I was selling coke.
Wow.
I'm like, what the fuck? How do you know? And so later when I looked at the magazine, it had my picture and then it said coke dealer. So, and that was just, they were clowning on me. I looked like
stigma. Yeah, that was a jacket they put on you and stuff like that. And did you want to live up to that at the time? Or are you feeling good about that?
Yeah, I was feeling good about it because it wasn't about like making money really. It was about not using my dad's money for drugs because I had some sort of integrity in my mind. And if I was hooking up all my friends, they were getting a good product. It was safe, all that kind of shit. So it's fascinating how we changed because I thought I was doing a public service.
Wow.
I really did. And then like 30 years later, if I would fast forward and when my baby's mom was stuck on dope, I wasn't really holding those dealers up in the high, revering them the way I was revering myself. When it's keeping her, even though I wasn't blaming them, but I'm like, how like the heroin thing, it's like, oh, that's cool. But when you're in it, it's not cool. It's lame and it sucks and you're dependent. So just going through those changes, but I wasn't even caring about school. I wasn't interested in learning none of that until 11th grade. And what happened in 11th grade, the English teacher came around and she's passing out 2 pieces of paper. This is on day 1. And she's like, I'm like, what are those? She's like, well, this is the syllabus and this is the book report. I'm like, oh, well, I'm cool on the book report, but I'll take the syllabus. She's like, well, it's mandatory that you do the book report. I'm like, well, no, I don't really read books. I know how to read, but I'm not going to do it. She's like, well, it's not due to the end of the class. Like the end of the year. I'm like, it's cool. No. She's like, but the best grade you can get in the class is a D. I'm like, I'll take the D. This is day 1. This was my mindset. I didn't care about learning. I didn't care. My whole thing was being stoned, class clowning, checking out the chicks. If I could get the teacher to laugh, bro, then it was like, because they're like telling you not to joke around, but if they laugh, then
what changed there? What changed?
So I took U.S. history and I got an F. And so, but I was in 11th grade and it's like, okay, soon I've got to wake up and realize life is about to happen because you're getting out of high school. But also that same year I took a psychology class and we sat around in a circle and we talked about life and the psyche, the mind. And I love that subject matter, man. I was fascinated by it. And yeah, I was stoned still, but I was able to learn and maybe that enhanced it, maybe it didn't. And that's when I decided I was 15 years old. I want to become a psychologist. So many things I've done in my life that have had good consequences or good outcomes to a great degree had poor motives going in, So I've been so blessed by the Lord, bro. And thank God this is an unfair world, man. And it's unfair to many people's disadvantage, but it's been unfair to my advantage.
So here you are now. You're changing your way of thinking, like I says, about at least you're picking up something you want to do. I want to be a psychologist. So you go into college and how'd the drug situation work out in college?
The thing about psychology, it's a very conservative field, but back then it was more you'd think about it of like hippies, like, the mind or whatever. So it seemed like it was more liberal back then. And so in the early years, I could justify smoking weed or doing drugs because, I'm studying the mind. And I was young in it. Later, when you're older and you're becoming a professional and you're smoking crack, then it gets hard to justify it. And fast forward there on the wall. So it was cool with me because I had it all together. Like I'm experimenting. I'm a guinea pig. I'm studying the mind. So whether it's a justification or it's real, who knows? I still haven't figured that out. But I went to Colorado State for my first year of college. I had a terrible GPA, but it was out of state. So they accepted me. And I went with a close buddy of mine, Rudy Dratt. And we grew weed and the thing. There were shrooms. We were partying. That was part of it. There was nothing else to do there. So it was perfect for that. But I also wanted to reinvent myself. And so I've seen in my life, I've always been trying to do things right, but I've also been doing things wrong on a parallel thing because I was reinventing myself then. And I realized I was a skinny dude. I was a late developer. And I'm like, man, I want to build my physique. And my buddy, Matt, who OD'd and died like 15 years ago, he was developing, he was into boxing and lifting weights, and he was getting a good physique. And he's like, dude, you could change your body by lifting weights. I'm like, really? And so when I tried it with him when I was 13, I'm like, this sucks. This is painful. This is stupid. Fuck this. But then at 17, when I graduated high school and I was still kind of behind and I'm interested in women, I'm like, man, I want to build it. So I would walk like 45 minutes, sometimes through the snow in Colorado to go to the gym. I hated working out. I dreaded it. And I was stoned before, after. I'd wake and bake. Like I was stoned all the time. And I have brain damage from it because like now I'm stoned all the time just from smoking it for 20 years every day plus everything else. You know what I'm saying? But the thing is,
you excelled in your school.
I excelled because it's a subject matter that I was interested in and that I understood, and there's no other subject matter I really get that much. So it was just, once again, it was a God thing. I was considered a heavy user, but I wasn't really an addict then, let's say. I wasn't in a highly destructive, but it's all relative. So then for my second year, I went to San Diego State, and that was known as like the Penthouse or Playboy Party School of the Year. And we got there, and there was this dude that had some meth, and the meth was real big down there. And it was kind of before it had hit some other areas. This was 1985. And so I did some, and this little crew were doing some, and I'm like getting stuff done, and I'm working out. And I'm like, man, this is great. I've got like half my homework done for the whole semester. And then the dude that was serving it to us confided in me. He's like, man, I got one class left to go, and I can't graduate because it's like a math class, whatever. And my mind's so fucked up. And I'm like, I should probably put this shit to the side, you know? Right. So there was always the blessing, like it says in the Bible, like God gives you a way out, right, when there's temptation and stuff like that. And like I said, there'd be different seasons. The crack cocaine thing is really what took me to my knees, you know, and just to fast forward it, and it wasn't like all day, every day. It was on the weekends, or it was every third weekend. And I never did it right, never got a bunch, never got the good pipe. I'd get like a $20 rock and think I'm just going to do one and then whatever. And then I'd keep going back and forth, whether I was living in Venice or South Central. And I'm like, should I take my skateboard? Should I walk? Should I drive? Because I didn't want to get my car taken. It's just such a mind fuck of bullshit and hiding it. And, oh, I'm going to wait, 5 minutes before I take, or 30 minutes before the next hit. Okay, 5, that's close enough. Just all the mind games you play with yourself. And I'm sure you know that. And it's a little bit different with heroin.
How long did you keep using drugs? Because you were going to school all this time.
It was.
How long did this continue on?
It was a off and on thing. And what's radical is when I turned 21, I was at USC, and I decided to stop at age 21 for 6 months. I already had it in my mind. I'm going to go completely off of drugs. Now, I wasn't physiologically dependent, but I had been using for a number of years, probably 10 years at that point. And it had grown. And so people were tripping out. They're like, oh my God, because I was telling them, I was like getting myself to be held accountable. Yeah, I'm going to quit when I turn 21 in, a week or whatever. People are like, yeah, right. And I did. And they were tripping out like, oh my God. And so for me, it was like, I wanted to prove to myself I was in control, but I was like bullshitting myself because I knew that ended 6 months to the day. I had like a Vans shoebox. When people would come around the house, in the fraternity house, like with shrooms or acid or weed or whatever, I'd get some, and was stockpiling. So it's like, yeah, I quit, but it was just putting it on hold for like Christmas at the end of it, Mm-hmm. And as soon as that day came, it was off to the races. Part of the reason I did it too, I wanted to clear my head because, I'm smoking PCP with the neighborhood there, Harpies or whatever. I'm drinking wine and stuff with the wino bums and stuff because I was into the community, There was like the kids that were in school doing coke. So I was doing a little bit of everything, and it was always kind of connected to a cultural scene, except the weed was like a daily thing. So
when did it get at its worst?
Man, it was the mid 1990s. It was 1998. Okay. Is when I got clean. And what happened was there were so many events that went on that I don't even have the time, but like car crashes, just so much shit going on. But the thing was, it was just, I finally got what they talk about, incomprehensible demoralization. And like you said, when did I stop? Like I had a year before, had 6 months, had different levels of time. I had gone to AA and NA and stuff like that, but they talked about a higher power. And I didn't believe in a higher power, really. I wasn't that egotistical to think, I'm like the highest power, I'm God. But because my father was such a good earthly father, he wasn't really a believer. I wasn't indoctrinated with that. So I was an atheist and into it, right? So the whole higher power concept was something that was like, it was really hard. And then so as I'd go back and use drugs, and then that was the only drug up until that point that really beat me up, that made me feel like a piece of shit. And as addicts, they say, we have an inflated ego and a low self-esteem. So it's like, man, I'm a piece of fucking shit, but I'm the greatest piece of shit in the world, Right. You're like, how does that make sense? But, addicts understand. And that's one reason that one addict working with another is without parallel, because we understand the shit that is insane and is paradoxical and not even really able to be understood because it doesn't make sense. Looking back, so what happened was I was like, man, and I've had a bunch of friends that were in AA and NA and CA and boggos, dudes in different clubs. So I took this literature commitment at a Cocaine Anonymous meeting. And I was going to the meetings, and I had known people already from it. And this one dude comes up to me. He's like, hey, man, are you loaded? I go, yeah, because I couldn't get clean on my own right then. And I knew if I start going to meetings, then maybe I'll be able to get clean. Just like instead of before you clean yourself up, go to church, and that'll give you the motivation, right? So some dudes, and it was like, I'm like, yeah, I'm still getting high, man. I'm just trying to, hopefully when I can quit. He's like, you know what? Keep coming back, brother. And that like support, man, was like, fuck, thank you, man. And I was able to then get clean. And so I was into it. Now I took a literature commitment from Cocaine Anonymous. Cocaine Anonymous started in 1983. It was in Cedars-Sinai, upper middle class, rich powder cocaine. But by the mid 1990s, it was a crack cocaine epidemic that was ruining South Central LA and stuff like that. So the South Central district of Cocaine Anonymous, South Central Los Angeles, was the biggest in the entire world. And so it's such a God thing how it worked out. I was going to Rodeo and Malibu AA meetings and all this shit with chicks with boom and snacks and standing room only and Robert Downey Jr., all this kind of shit, and with my buddy Porno Ron. And I just clearly remember I'm sitting there at the meeting and a woman was speaking. She was an alcoholic. And I not to put her down, but just I wasn't feeling it. I wasn't hearing anything that I needed. She did not mention anything about God or higher power. And the one thing I remember hearing is she got her acrylic nails done that day, and she broke one of them on the Mercedes-Benz steering wheel, and she wanted to drink over it. And it hit me because it just didn't hit me. You know what I'm saying? So the next week before that meeting, and it's like, man, it starts at 8. You got to be the early, standing room only, all this kind of bullshit. I go to get the literature, and everybody who works there, they're just a trusted servant volunteering. So this dude at the central office is late for my literature. I'm like, under my breath, muttering, this motherfucker, cocksucker, all this type of shit. Excuse my French. And, no disrespect intended for people who engage in that behavior. But the dude was late. Now, there was a brother, straight ghetto black dude, cool, on the phone lines, doing his thing for people that are calling in, ear hustling. I wasn't paying a lot of attention to him, but he sensed what was going on. And this was a point where if I wasn't at a meeting, if I wasn't at school, if I wasn't at the gym, if I wasn't involved with constructive activity, the car would just go to the dope spot. And you could get dope anywhere back then because every neighborhood, even like this, they were curb serving. And I lived in Venice, Showline Cribs, boom, right next to my pad. I could hit the stop sign, get served, and boom, go to my pad.
So you got clean 1998.
Yep.
And then did you focus on your school? Is that what kept you clean there, along with meetings and other stuff like that?
It was focusing on everything. It was trying to be busy as fuck. But of the story, what's radical was the dude. So I'm like, fuck, this dude gave me the literature late. And then it kind of fucked off my meeting for Rodeo. And so this black dude who was on the phone was like, hey, dude, you need a meeting? And I'm like, yes, brother. Thank you so much. I need a meeting because literally if I didn't go to a meeting, I'd probably smoke crack. So he goes, follow me. So I follow him to this meeting in Watts called Cuckoo After One Puff. It was Friday night from 9 p.m. to 11 p.m. And it was all ghetto black. They saw me at first. They're thinking, what? Because I looked racist, I'm sure, to them. But they welcomed me with open arms, man. And there was no hot chicks or killer snacks or coffee with creamers and shit. It was raw gut coffee. But, man, I would have goosebumps when I would hear these people speak. Men and women, dudes would talk about sucking dick for rock. And I'm like, that's more relatable in a sense than the broken acrylic nail. I ain't trying to go there. I'll rob a bank first. But it was powerful, man. Yeah. They were talking about the real deal stuff. The women.
It hit you right where you needed to be hit. And that's what a lot of people got to understand. A lot of people tuning in and stuff like that got to understand. If you don't know about addicts, if you don't know about this disease, you don't know about this sin, you don't know about this kind of trouble in our minds, that's why you got to listen to people like us. We can tell you about your kid, your husband, your wife, your granddaughter, your grandma. You never know who it is. So here you are. You're all this. You're still going to school all this time.
Yes. And you know how you talk about the love drug, infatuation, sex, lust, whatever it is, and how it's the worst. Well, that was really one of my bigger problems. And I knew it in a sense, but I was in denial. But the cool thing about going to the Cocaine Anonymous in South Central, I wasn't really distracted on the chicks. And I started going to therapy around that time for school because we have to go to our own therapy to see what it's like to sit in that seat, to work on our own issues. And I had a shitload. I mean, after the first time I saw this therapist, she was a regular, normal African-American Christian woman that a friend of mine turned me on to, who was going there, and we got half off. Towards the end of the first session, she's like, I don't know if I could take you on as a client. And I was kind of taken aback, and I'm like, Why? Like what? She's like, your story is so hardcore. Now, you know the stories we hear, and I'm comparing it, like grading on a curve compared to the circle that I'm hanging with. I'm like, my story ain't shit, but it's all relative. Well, I'm like, I hope you can take me on. And it's radical because prior to that, when I was at SC, we had to write a paper in this one class in counseling psychology about a therapy experience. So I went to the school counseling center to have a therapy experience to write my paper. I didn't tell them that. I'm just like, yeah, I just want to explore my issues and all that. So I didn't know if it was an intern or a therapist, any of that. And I ran my story. Right. Everything seemed cool. Came back the next week. I had already written the paper and turned it in. And the director, who was an African-American woman, comes out. And I'm like, where's the therapist? She's like, well, you freaked her out. I'm going to see you from now on. I'm like, all right, cool. Wow. But it didn't like bum me out or make me ashamed, but it did give me a good lesson as a therapist of I never wanted a client to feel that they freaked me out. I never wanted a client to feel judged. And that's now with the clients that I get through you and stuff like that. They don't feel that because I'm not inclined to judge. I'm not in a position to, all the mistakes we've made. And it's nice for them. And that's why also an addict working with another addict is good. So, going back to the therapy, so I'm like, okay, so she let me be a client of hers, and then into it at one point, seemingly out of nowhere for me, I got blindsided. She's like, what would it be like for you to not be involved with women for a year? I'm like, got plexed up, like fucking like just something. I'm like, what the fuck? Where did that come from? Now, of course, I had been telling her about all my risky and irresponsible and crazy behavior.
Now, just for your information, we're taking you how it really is in a therapy meeting where no holds barred. To get well, it's like when we go to the doctor says, where does it hurt? And we tell the doctor, I'm not telling. Nobody's going to get help. So you're taking us back to your little couch experience, the sofa sitting there, being honest with this therapist, freaking one out. And you learn from that because who would know your destiny? You'd be a licensed marriage family therapist today.
And I knew that I was going in that direction because remember at 15, I decided that's the only thing I ever thought that I do. So I was already in that direction. So I was at the time, but I was being very open, but I was in denial, as we all are. So like when she blindsided me in my mind with the chick question, like a year, I'm like, dude, I don't even want to hear that shit. Maybe next time we could talk about the subject hypothetically for like what it would be like to not be dealing with a woman for like a month or some shit. But it didn't offend me. But that's the telltale question. Like, we've had people come and like, well, I like weed, but it's not a problem and, whatever. And then you're like, okay, well, how would it be to not smoke it? And they can't, so that's a good indicator for anybody out there in TV land. If someone would propose to you or if you propose to yourself to not do a certain behavior, whether it's Facebook or any sort of thing that can be an addictive behavior, if you get all plexed up, it's an indication that you've got an attachment to it, that it's a problem. And so, females, pussy, excuse the expression, that was my first addiction, but I didn't even know it, And so we have all these psychological problems. They say when the pain of staying the same is greater than the fear of change. I was in pain and didn't know it. I was afraid and didn't know it. Like all of us, and I was in denial, and that was self-medicating for it, plus the whole thing of being cool and fitting in with your peers at the time. And then it was just who I was, and I had for so many years. But with the rock cocaine thing, by the time I got to that point in the mid to late 90s, I hated that shit, bro. I would take a hit, and I would know so bad that the millisecond after doing that hit, I'm going to be in hell. I'm going to hate it for the next 2 days, whatever it turns out to be, till I break out either in handcuffs or just no more money and I ain't going to go rob nobody. So it was like, that's when it was done. And I'd know that and I'd still do it, man. And I'd be like, fuck it, I'll deal with that then. And then was like literally like 2 minutes because it would give me that rush and then impending doom, anxiety, just feeling like I really wished I wouldn't even wake up. I wished I wasn't alive. Wow. I wasn't suicidal. And I know you've been to the same state, probably worse, but it was just a terrible feeling of discomfort in one's skin and just the worst thing. So that's when I started getting ready to be clean because it wasn't fun anymore. When it worked for me, why would I want to stop when it was fun? You know what I'm saying? So that's pretty much it, And then I met my baby's mom in NA and a million other fucking problems and good things from them, brother.
Well, this is so cool because our upcoming episodes, we're going to be talking not just about where you came from, where I came from, and not just worldwide what the drug problem is today in America and all over the world, but we're going to talk about some possible solutions. And that's what we're doing all this for. Like I said, we don't want to just give you info, our testimonies, our story, because everybody's got a story.
Right.
We want to be able to help give you some solutions. We want you to have a happy ending. We want you to be able to do something with your life today. We want to give you some information, something, tools that you can use today. So stay tuned.
Yes.
I'm going to get ready and I'm going to be telling a little bit of my story. You know, this is just a little bit here, but I've learned so much about you, Dr. Richie, from this and how it's affected what you're doing. The choices we make today affect our tomorrows. So stay tuned. I'm going to get ready right now. Yeah.
I want to say one more thing, bro, and then hopefully I want to kind of interview you like you've been able to do for me next week when we do our thing. But I want to just say, like what you said is, I have no intention to glorify, and sometimes we tend to glorify it. So to any extent that seemed to be making it seem cool or glorifying it, I really want to say it's not cool. It didn't help me. You know, I wouldn't want my kids to go in that direction. So if anybody's like, yeah, it's cool, it's not cool. You know, I've heard from the kids that we work with, I say kids like 25-year-old, where other people are going around and these people are already using drugs, but they're like, hey, try the needle, try this. And it's just so sad because we work with people that OD and die. So for, you know, as we get into the happy ending, and kids might leave because kids aren't supposed to watch the happy ending, but I guess they can with our show. Please don't take this on a positive like drugs are cool. It just wasn't, man. So I just wanted to throw that in there, my brother.
Oh, yeah, this is a good part. This is coming from a man right now who's got his PhD in clinical counseling and just runs programs all over California. So, hey, stay tuned. I'll be coming back with you, telling you a little bit about my story. Go to heaven.
Yes.
It's all yours, Lord, everything that I have, Lord. I know it ain't much, Lord, but take all of me.
That's right, brother, that's right. That's right. It's like having a pink purse.